O chosen people, proclaim the mighty works of him who has called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. This Mass is being offered for Roscoe Timmerman. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. The Lord be with you. Brethren, let us acknowledge our sins and so prepare ourselves to celebrate the sacred mystery. I confess. Almighty God, and to my brothers and sisters, that I have greatly sinned in my thoughts and in my words, in what I have done, and what I have failed to do, through my fault, through my mysterious fault. Therefore I ask the Blessed Mary, our Virgin, all the angels and saints, and you, my brothers and sisters, pray for me till the Lord our hour. May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us our sins, and bring us to everlasting life. Amen. Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Let us pray. Almighty and living God, who have made sacred this day's rejoicing, the glorification of blessed Juniper Rosary, graciously grant that we may strive always to keep and to put into practice the faith which with unquenchable zeal he strove to proclaim. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. A reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings glad tidings, announcing peace, bearing good news, announcing salvation, and saying to Zion, your God is King. Hark, your sentinels raise a cry. Together they shout for joy, for they see directly before their eyes the Lord restoring Zion. Break out together in song, O ruins of Jerusalem. For the Lord comforts his people, he redeems Jerusalem. The Lord has bared his holy arm in the sight of all the nations. All the ends of the earth will behold the salvation of our God. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You are my inheritance, O Lord. Keep me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, my Lord are you. O Lord, my allotted portion and my cup, you it is who hold fast my lot. You are my inheritance, O Lord. I bless the Lord who counsels me. Even in the night my heart exhorts me. I set the Lord ever before me. With him at my right hand I shall not be disturbed. You are my inheritance, O Lord. You will show me the path to life. Fullness of joys in your presence, the delights at your right hand forever. You are my inheritance, O Lord. Alleluia, alleluia. Alleluia. Go and teach all nations, says the Lord. I am with you always until the end of the world. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus went around to all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and curing every disease and illness. At the sight of the crowds, his heart was moved with pity for them, because they were troubled and abandoned,
like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is abundant, but the laborers are few. So ask the master of the harvest to send out laborers for his harvest." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
You'll have to forgive the slightly late start today. So I hadn't realized that today is the optional memorial for Saint Junipero Serra. And I thought it fitting to kind of change plans and switch to white and to celebrate that optional memorial, especially these days after we've seen kind of the tearing down of his statues in California, for example, and really to stand up for, as a church, to stand up for the truth of what he preached and the importance of his message. And we see that there's a movement in our times really to get rid of anything which would claim universality, right? Basically, the claim is that anybody who claims to have something to say to every other culture is wrong, because ultimately the world is just a group of, or a set of different groups that all want their own thing, right? And then they vie for that with each other, right? So it's just a contest for power. This is kind of the ideology that we have going on nowadays. Whereas, of course, the Christian message is, no, there is a truth which applies to all people, right? And that God has come to give us that truth. We haven't discovered it. God has come to reveal that truth to us in the person of Jesus Christ. And so that message of Christ needs to be spread. And in fact, the message of Christ needs to correct every culture in the world. Right? Every group of persons. It's true, there are different groups of people with their own cultures, and each culture has its own beauty, has its own glimmer of the truth that it picks up on, right? You can't have a culture without that. And yet, every culture also needs correction. And so the message of Christ comes and corrects our own culture, right? And the culture of every people of the earth. And this is what certainly this was already assumed by those who went out and preached the message of Christ. And it wasn't something really questioned at the time, this idea that there could be an absolute truth which applied to all people. This is exactly what's in question now. And the forces that are at work now to kind of tear down the culture that we see around us kind of come from that attitude that there can be nothing that fundamentally unites all cultures. And we can't believe that, because ultimately we would devolve into a world in endless war, right? Christ comes to bring peace. He comes to bring peace through the truth, right? The truth that comes into cultures and changes them. And we see this as the driving force behind change in our own cultures, right? In the cultures that we're used to, that ultimately when we see a person who stands up to what is wrong within any culture, within our own culture, for example, Blessed Junipero Serra did this himself, right? With the Spanish who went to excesses in kind of lording it over the Native Americans in California. He called them out on that. Why? How could he do that being within that Spanish culture himself? Because he believed in something which transcended that culture, which was the truth of Jesus Christ, right? And that culture had been formed somewhat by that, but of course, every culture has sins within it that it accepts. And so even a culture strongly formed by Christianity needs to constantly hear the message of Christ and be reformed by it, right? And so Junipero Serra both came to evangelize the peoples in California, but also to correct the problems within the culture that was supposedly and hopefully bringing that religion to the Americas, right? And so we see that the truth of all of these matters is much more complicated than people want to reduce it to. And the ultimate battle that is being fought right now, even though people don't see it per se at the individual level, is a battle between saying that there is no truth that can unite us, and there is a truth that can unite us. And we need to stand boldly for that latter position, that there is a truth that can unite us. There is a unity given to us by God who created us all, right? That we are united in that truth of God, and that together we need to be reformed into the likeness of God, which he intended for us from the beginning.